Oh, you're right. The rumors are true. The rumors are true. I am a filthy, filthy conservative. All right, let me turn the music down just a hair. Good to see you, Origin. All right. Well, I don't know if anyone will stop by tonight other than Origin, who I messaged specifically to tell him that this was happening, because this was a last-minute plan. I have been a little bit out of sorts the past few nights or most of this week. Got some family in town and things, but I need to get some work done. My kids have prevented me from doing it when I would have liked to, so I need to get back in the saddle, get a head start on some stuff heading into the month of June. So I wanted to do at least a short stream tonight, about an hour or so, going through one of the more boring parts of the class that I teach on the political thought of the American founding. It's a section that I think I'm going to cut from the truncated version of the course that I'm teaching this summer, but it's one that I want to refresh on because it's relevant to contemporary conversations. And it's a section on debates over the form that the American government should take. What kind of conservative? That's a great question. If I call myself a traditional conservative, that brings with it a lot of baggage that I don't necessarily intend, but it's probably most accurate. If I call myself a Burkean conservative, that to some people smacks of liberalism, but slowly. Barry Goldwater or Karl Rove. I mean, of the two, probably closer to Goldwater. I don't know. I need to chew on that for a bit. But I mean, the person in conservative American history I ally with most consistently on most things is Russell Kirk. So if you want to know about him, I'll gladly tell you. Here, let me adjust my camera again because let's put you a little bit over here because I want you guys to see more of the ukuleles. So this is my sort of resting position, but if I shift my camera to the right, then you get to see more ukes. And that's the point. So the section of, let me see if I can pull up what I've got here. Okay, so what we're talking about today is this over here, debating unicameralism and simple government. And the reason I am probably going to cut this section from my 1 week intensive version of this course is we take bicameralism kind of for granted in America, and for good reason. But we tend to forget that there were proponents of unicameralism, and it's worth talking about when you have time to do it. But when I am teaching a class where we have 1 week, 3 hours each morning, this debate is not top of the list, right? It's not equivalent of Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. It's not equivalent of Tories and revolutionaries. It's not equivalent of etc. Right? So it's something that I think I can punt mostly, except by way of a footnote in a lecture. So I'm going to spend less time on it. Do we agree that President Washington is the most important and greatest U.S. president? Yes and yes, I think. I think the only one who contends with him is Lincoln in terms of importance, that is setting the tone of the American presidency, and greatest in terms of doing what he ought to have done. I think those are the only two that are in serious contention for that title. So yes, pondering politics, I think we agree. I might, depending on my mood, I might say Lincoln, but Washington in terms of setting norms and standards, in terms of establishing the sort of tone and precedence for what it means to be an American president, you'd be hard-pressed to make an argument for anybody else. Also, hello, Josiah. I hope you're doing well. I want you to know that though we disagree on many things, including court packing and most democratic policies, I am glad that you think I'm a decent fella. So I'm glad to see you around. Thank you for stopping by. It's good to see you. It's pretty wild, by the way. It's kind of crazy knowing that I've known you for long enough to see the rise of, you're just doing some political commentary on YouTube, man. You're just like doing some cool stuff, and then like boom, explosion. I mean, obviously your rise to prominence has exacerbated our differences, but it wasn't that long ago that we were just doing some small panels and stuff, so it's good to see you. Well, I do appreciate that. I have had people question what that means about me, that you respect me, but I'll choose to take it still as a compliment. No, I think you and I both know that we have sincere disagreements that make us far apart on many political things, but I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I think you're sincere though wrong, and I hope you think the same about me. So Washington was probably our best president. I think so. Certainly, though Adams is one of my favorite presidents or favorite founding fathers, it would be hard to make a case that Adams was anything close to a good president. Sorry, I fumbled there. I do not mean that Adams is one of my favorite presidents. Adams is he's close to my favorite founder. Probably one of the worst presidents we've ever had. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy how that works. Yeah. So, well, thank you guys for both stopping by. I appreciate it. Yeah. So, what I want to go through right now, and this is something I need to rearrange this first because it's going to annoy me because I have these out of order. The things I want to read through really quickly today to decide if I want to keep them in my reader for this summer. First is 4 letters on interesting subjects. And I need to have the name here because these are from my good frenemy, Thomas Paine. Okay, so Paine, I've mentioned a couple of times already, much to the chagrin of many other people. I think his status as a founder is strongly contestable. Okay, the fact that he's included in this reader is a good case for him. The fact that he's writing influential pamphlets like Common Sense, like these 4 letters, they're very influential, wildly influential. It would be impossible to overstate Paine's influence on revolutionary sentiment. But the reason I think he's contestable as a founder is Paine's influence on actual politics and institutions in the American founding is relatively minimal to non-existent, and we'll see part of why as we skim through his 4 letters on interesting subjects here. So we're going to start with his 4 letters on interesting subjects and the interest of America. Then we're going to move to the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776. That is the Constitution that Franklin primarily drafts for Pennsylvania, which makes it an outlier among the American colonies or states in the founding of having a unicameral legislature, a pretty weird system of executive power. And then we got a short essay from Benjamin Rush on the Constitution of Pennsylvania. And so in refreshing on these, basically what I want to do is both do a short little episode here for about an hour on complex versus simple government in the founding era, the debates around it, but also help myself decide, is this what I want my students this summer to be reading in our very limited time we have together? And my intuition is the answer is no. So you guys tell me if you think differently, okay? And because we have a few people here, it's good to see you guys. If you want to like the stream, I would not be upset, but you don't have to. If you want to subscribe, if you're not subscribed, I wouldn't be upset, but you don't have to. This is not primarily about my own ego or content creation, although it'd be fun. One of the reasons I wanted to start streaming again was to have a place when I do panels and debates and things, to have a channel to point people to if they want to find some of my stuff. But also, I've never been consistent with content creation, never will be, and so this is just going to be a landing pad for some productivity stuff. So we're starting off with this. Paine's 4 letters on interesting subjects written in 1776. And again, I'm going to apologize for the quality of the PDF. If you're trying to read along at home, you may have trouble reading because of the way I have this spaced out. But I'll read the important parts and we can discuss it. Okay, so Paine begins. Among the many publications which have appeared on the subject of political constitutions, none that I have seen have properly defined what is meant by a constitution, that word having been bandied about without any determinate sense being affixed thereto. A constitution and a form of government are frequently confounded together, and this would have been a pretty common confounding at the time Paine is writing. Most translations of Aristotle's Politics, for example, are going to translate that word politeia as constitution. Some of them translate it as like regime, but basically Aristotle says there is a thing which is like the animating spirit of the political community, in the same way that we think all living beings have some sort of animating spirit. That is this thing he calls the politeia, and this is the constitution. That's how we usually translate it into English, of the city. It's the thing that constitutes it, that makes it what it is. It's the thing that animates it and drives it towards its activities. And Paine is going to offer some pushback here. A constitution and form of government are frequently confounded together and spoken of as synonymous things, whereas they are not only different, but are established for different purposes. All countries have some form of government, but few, or perhaps none, have truly a constitution, and that's a fair claim, I think. If you're an American already, right? So he's writing this in 1776. This is before we have our written constitution in the United States. If you're thinking as an American now, though, right, you think, okay, well, we have a written constitution. We have a document we can go to. There are articles and provisions that say what the government can and can't do. At the time that constitution was ratified, there were not a ton of countries in the world that had written constitutions in the way that we made them, ours. In fact, we may be unique in that respect, or at least close to it. And so he says, let's be careful not to make a kind of category error here between the form of government and this thing we're going to call a constitution. Well, we need to know what he thinks a constitution is. Thomas Paine, more like Thomas Paine in the neck. You're right. And so too did all of his friends agree with you, which is why no one showed up at his funeral. Sad Thomas Paine. Sad Thomas Paine. Okay, anyways. The form of government of England is by kings, lords, and commons. But if you ask an Englishman what he means when he speaks of the English Constitution, he's unable to give you any answer. Now, that's not entirely true, and Paine knows this. Paine is familiar with people like Burke, people before Burke. He knows that people know what the English Constitution is. What he's getting at is that the English Constitution is... Well, I'll just let him speak for himself. Sorry, let me not get ahead of him. The truth is, the English have no fixed constitution. The prerogative of the crown, it is true, is under several restrictions, right? So Magna Carta, for example, and other restrictions that have accreted over the course of English political history, that have restricted the executive power and so on, that have made it so that the executive doesn't often exercise his veto, that have made it so that the executive does not often exercise any prerogative that he might have in theory. These are all things that exist in England. But he says the legislative power, which includes king, lords, and commons, is under none. And so this is an important feature of the English Constitution that makes... that you should grab onto, by the way, if you're wanting to differentiate between what the Americans do and what the English did. If you find somebody saying, well, didn't the Americans basically just copy English common law and so on? An important feature of English common law, or English law, the English Constitution, is that all parts of government are part of the legislative power. Locke talks about this, right? In an important way, all parts of the English government are folded into the legislative power. And that is something that the Americans are going to want to make, if not completely distinct, at least more distinct than it was in the English Constitution. So, Paine says, whatever acts they pass are laws, be they ever so oppressive or arbitrary. Right? So this is, I want to zoom in on that for a second. Right? He says, whatever acts they pass are laws, be they ever so oppressive or arbitrary. He's raising this as an objection to the English system. I have heard people relatively recently say, and throughout my life say, that judicial review proper was not intended explicitly in the Constitution. And that is like both halfway true and halfway not true. That's actually a fight. I doubt he's still hanging around. He has better things to do with his time. But if Josiah is still around, it's adjacent to a fight we've had before about the concept of judicial supremacy. Right? It is true that there was no consensus about the role of the Supreme Court of the United States in checking whether a law was constitutional or not at the time the Constitution was ratified. That's true. Nevertheless, it's also true that if you just go read Federalist 78, for example, you will learn that at least the most prominent defenders of the Constitution believed that Article 3 of the Constitution implied a power of judicial review. That is, the power of the courts to look at a law and say, hey, a law that is not passed in accordance with the authority granted to the government is no good law, doesn't count, throw it out. So there were at least some people in the ratification debates who believed in this thing we call judicial review. I would also point you here, again, I hate pointing to Paine. Again, it pains me. Puns. It pains me to point to Paine as an example, right? But one of Paine's primary complaints here in these 4 letters on interesting subjects about the English Constitution is that the legislature, the legislative power, which includes Parliament and the king and the nobles, they can pass whatever law they want. And as long as they do it procedurally correctly, it's fine. It's good. Thumbs up. Right? There's no aspect of a constitution in the way that we think of it today, or the way that Paine is thinking of it then, that can come along and say, no, that law doesn't count. No, that's out of bounds. No, that violates the rules. It's not a good law and thus cannot be enforced. Right? So that's okay. So I hate to lean on Paine to make that argument, but at least from 1776, when Paine is writing these letters, at least from the late 1780s, when we have the Federalist authors writing, there are people who are saying, hey, a proper government has some means of saying, whoa, beep, 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 foul on the play. You can't pass that law. Okay. But sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. I want to let him speak for himself. Sorry. England is likewise defective in constitution in 3 other material points. The crown, by virtue of patent from itself, can increase the number of lords, one of the legislative branches, at his pleasure. This, for Paine, is insane. Right. Okay. So, the English Constitution, if you don't know, creates a parliament. The parliament has 2 houses. One of those houses is the House of Commons. One of them is the House of Lords. According to the English Constitution, the king can snap his fingers and create a new seat in the House of Lords whenever he wants. I hope, if you're listening, that you can see the problem with this, or the potential problem with this, right? I hope that you can see that if you have a king who potentially doesn't like the things one body of the legislature is doing, can just create more seats in the legislature and staff it with the people that would support him, I hope you can see why that's a problem. The crown can likewise, by a patent, incorporate any town or village, small or great, and empower it to send members to the House of Commons and fix the precise number of fix what the precise number of electors shall be. Whoa, wait a second. The king can increase the number of members of the House of Lords directly. He can, by patent, incorporate new towns and give them representatives in the House of Commons. It sounds like the king has the power to bloat the legislature with whatever people he thinks will side with him. And an act of the legislative power, that is, an act of kings, lords, and commons, can again diminish the House of Commons to whatever number they please by disenfranchising any county, city, or town. There's no precise mechanism in the English Constitution that would stop a king from reducing the number of representatives in similar cases, right? So, what does Paine say about this? It's easy to perceive that individuals, by agreeing to erect forms of government for the better security of themselves, must give up some part of their liberty for that purpose. And it is the particular business of a constitution to mark out how much they shall give up. So again, I'll keep making this terrible pun, but it does pain me to give Paine credit, but Paine has good political intuitions here, which is, if you just accept the Lockean framework of government, which is, hey, I find the state of nature inconvenient. So me and my fellow men, who are equal by nature, all unanimously agreed to leave the state of nature and create a society. Now that society votes, and whatever the majority decides in that society, we will create as a government to make laws for our benefit. Paine's like, yeah, that sounds nice. I kind of agree in theory. But wouldn't it be nice if we had some sort of record, some sort of document, some sort of thing we could point to that sort of demarcated the precise bounds of the liberty we were giving up? Right? Because Paine is not thinking like Hobbes, where you give up everything to the sovereign. He's not thinking like Rousseau, where each fellow surrenders himself to the body and is free because everyone equally agrees. No, it's a sort of pragmatic argument for the establishment of a government that takes some of the liberties I had by nature, exercises them for me on my behalf, and wouldn't it be nice to know exactly the limits of that? And that's what a constitution is for. A constitution, Paine is leading us to believe, is not just whatever the form of government is. It's whatever structure or document or system says, here but no further. Here are the limits of the power I've given to the legislative body in the system of government I've created. And the English Constitution has a flaw in that it's this accreted body of tradition that is fluid and interpretable, and there's no piece of paper I can point to that says, hey, that thing you just did is definitely out of bounds. You just violated my First Amendment rights, my Second Amendment rights, and so on, right? The way we think about it now. Okay, let's keep going. Sorry, I'm undercutting his argument by giving it for him and probably doing a worse job. In this sense, it's easy to see that the English have no constitution because they have given up everything. Their legislative power being unlimited without either condition or control, except in the single instance of trial by juries, right? This is the one thing that is just like an English constitutional principle that is inviolable. You have a right to a trial by jury. Let's jump ahead. This is where he gives us a sort of criterion for what makes a good constitution or a legitimate constitution. A constitution, when completed, resolves the two following questions. First, what shall be the form of government be? And secondly, what shall be its power? And the last of these two is far more material than the first. The Constitution ought likewise to make provision in those cases where it does not empower the legislature to act, right? So it should have some sort of... Sorry, I'm getting ahead again. Oh man, wow, this PDF is terrible. I have to get my hard copy off campus next week. This is one of the reasons I'm working with this awful PDF is I don't have my hard copy with me. Now, so he moves from there to discussion of the particular forms of government, right? So he says, okay, we've established that a good constitution establishes both the form of government and its limits. Now let's figure out what the reasonable forms of government would be. One form of government that is suggested is a bicameral legislature. That is a legislature with two houses. There are... some people like Paine who argue for a unicameral legislature. That is a legislature or a legislative body that has one representative body. So England has a bicameral legislature of a sort. It has a House of Lords and a House of Commons. The U.S., as we know, develops a bicameral legislature. It has a Congress or a House and a Senate. Many people, like Paine, like Franklin, like some others at the time, think this is an unnecessary complication. It effectively increases friction where friction maybe should not exist. It, as he says here, divides them from being able to hear each other's arguments, right? There's an idea that if you have all the legislators in one legislative body, that they get to hear the arguments of all the others. Like, why would we ever separate that out? So what sorts of arguments, the reason I teach this in my sort of semester-long class is I want to get students thinking about, like, why is it that we have two houses of Congress? What possible justifications could we have for it? And I want to poke and prod them into thinking about that before we actually get the arguments for it. Because as you can see, if you just read a little bit further on the syllabus, I, over the next couple of weeks, give them writings from John Adams. And John Adams is the chief defender of a bicameral legislature in the American founding period. He's going to be the person who's going to argue not just like, oh, it's what England does, so we should do it. Oh, like there's some things we could... No, like he's going to make strong in principle arguments why it's better to have two different houses, a smaller house, ultimately, as we see in the Senate, representing the states, and a larger house representing the people. But I want to give them a sort of fair showing of the people who think differently, because those people are not as common today. Well, maybe they're becoming more common, right? Because there are more and more people, especially on the, I think today, the left-leaning side of the equation, who suggest that it would be better to simplify government, that it's kind of weird that we have a disproportional representation, that the Senate gives this benefit to these smaller states, right? So that's an argument that's becoming more in vogue today. And so I want my students to know what were the historical arguments for two different houses, for the Senate as it exists today. Why, or well, not as it exists today, because we changed that. We now directly elect our senators, but that's neither here nor there. Well, it is here. We'll get there eventually, but it's so hard to teach these things without getting sidetracked. So, okay, let's go back over to Paine. He does a good job, by the way. Paine, as much as I dislike him, he's a good writer. He's a good rhetorician, and he's really good at understanding his opponent's arguments. I'm sure you can find places where he's straw manning, as we might like to say, but in general, Paine is somebody who is fully capable of understanding why his opponents think the way that they do, and explaining why he thinks they're dumb, bad, and wrong, and he does it really effectively. Says that the chief convenience arising from two houses is that the second may sometimes amend small imperfections which would otherwise pass. Right? So this is going to be the argument that we'll see, at least in part, from Adams when we get there. I'm trying to figure out how far down the rabbit hole to go on this. You may have heard it said that the founding fathers were critics of democracy. You may have heard it said that the founding fathers did not like democracy, that they used democracy as a dirty word. And in some senses, this is true. They are at times cribbing from, let's say, Aristotle, for example, who treats democracy as mob rule. This word democracy comes from the Greek words demos, which referred in ancient Athens, ancient city-states to certain sort of like neighborhood or district or people groups that made up the civic polity, and kratos, or that has to do with rule or power. So rule by the demos. Democracy, as Aristotle uses it in his typology, we talked a few times ago, if you were here, nobody was, but it's fine, about Aristotle's, sixfold typology of regimes or constitutions. Origen hates it when I use the word regime, so I keep using it just to bother him. He says there are good forms of government and bad forms of government. And so the form of government, how we identify it, depends on the principle of rule, or in other words, who does the ruling, and then what they are ruling for, or on whose behalf they are ruling. So on one side of the spreadsheet, we have the types of rule for the common good. On the other side of the spreadsheet, we have rule for the benefit of the rulers. And on the good side of the spreadsheet, we have rule by the one, the few, and the many. The rule by the one, that is for the common good, is a monarchy or a kingship. Rule by the few for the common good is an aristocracy. That's ruled by the best, the aristos, the best men. And rule by the many for the common good is a politeia. So Aristotle uses that same word for the animating principle of the city to refer to the plural kind of rulership in the city. On the bad side of the spreadsheet, we have rule for the benefit of the rulers. By the one, that's a tyranny. By the few, it's an oligarchy, rule by the rich. And by the many, he calls it a democracy, a rule by the demos. And so you may have heard it said that the founding fathers did not like democracy. And in a sense, that is true. You will find letters, writings, essays, etc., where the founders say bad, nasty things about democracy. They use that word, democracy. What they mean by democracy is very different from what we mean when we use that word democracy, because denotations and connotations of words change all the time. We use democracy to refer to effectively what Aristotle would have referred to as a politeia, or at least that's what we think we mean. Let me qualify. When you find somebody today who praises the virtues of democracy, what they are praising is rule by the many for the benefit of all. That's what Aristotle would have called a politeia. It's not what he would have called a democracy. So when you come to the writings of the founders and you hear them say kind of nasty things about democracy, don't let the fact that we sometimes call the United States a liberal democracy or a democratic republic scare you, right? They would have, if we could have caught them up on connotations of words over time, they'd be fine with it. Okay. Their fear of democracy is that, as with Aristotle, they treated democracy proper as rule by the mob. And this is what Paine is responding to. Paine is somebody, and this is why I don't like Paine, Paine is somebody who's perfectly fine with rule by the mob, as you can see by his support for the French and his near beheading over in France. Paine is fine with rule by the mob. And he thinks any advantage or any convenience that you get from impeding the will of the popular house is weighed out. He says it's balanced by a similar disadvantage. A division in one house will not retard business, but rather serves to illustrate. But a difference between two houses may produce serious consequences. Yeah, I'm going to have to speed up because, oh my goodness, it's already been the literal translation. Yeah, it is polity. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't use that word republic. That's we like it. Res publica, the things of the public. Yeah, it's on. I mean, the Bloom would have titled the Republic on the regime, but he decided to keep the standard English Republic translation, just because we've Latinized everything. Okay. Okay. So let me actually jump ahead to. My goodness, this part of the PDF is so badly scanned. Let's go to the Pennsylvania Constitution, because it's easier to talk about this with an example than just to do the sort of freewheeling, spitballing I've been doing. We're going to get down here to 339, Constitution of Pennsylvania. Here we go. All right. Dear heavens, what are we doing? Okay. The Commonwealth or State of Pennsylvania shall be governed hereafter by an assembly of the representatives of the freemen of the same, and a president and a council in a manner and form of the following. The supreme legislative power shall be vested in a House of Representatives of the freemen of the Commonwealth or State of Pennsylvania. So one house. The supreme executive power shall be vested in the president and a council. Courts of justice shall be established in the city of Philadelphia and every county of the state. So this is the kind of unique thing about Pennsylvania, the colony gifted to the Penn family. This is a proprietary or private corporate commonwealth rather than a royal colony. Kind of makes it unique from some other colonies at the time. But the way that it is set up here in the Constitution of 1776 is that there will be one legislative body, not two houses, not a House and a Senate, as almost every other colony had. And that the executive will not just be vested in a governor, but will instead be vested in a president and a council. There's a plural executive power in Pennsylvania as well. That is another kind of wacky thing that sets Pennsylvania apart here. My goodness, hold on. I have to keep adjusting these things. Yeah, so every freeman of the full age of 21 years, having resided in the state for the space of 1 whole year next, before the day of election of representatives, and paid public taxes during that time, shall enjoy the right of an elector, provided always that sons of freeholders of the age of 21 years shall be entitled to vote, although they have not paid taxes. So there's a sort of stakeholdership model here in the people who are entitled to electoral votes. These are the people who are freemen, that is, not enslaved people. And freemen also here, I'm gonna spitball here, and I will have to go back and correct myself if I'm wrong, but I believe freeman here has the connotation of property ownership as well. Let me, I don't have the time to do. Let me put a pin in that and come back to it, and I'll correct myself next stream if I'm wrong. But so, for example, a big marked moment in John Adams' life was when his father passed away, and he and his siblings inherited parts of their father's estate, and John Adams became a freeholder in the state of Massachusetts, which gave him elector rights in Massachusetts. He was able to contribute to voting, to hold office, etc. I'm not entirely sure that freeman here means the same thing, but I think it might have some of the same connotation. But at the very least, it's, non-enslaved men, at least 21 years of age. If you reside in the state for at least a year, if you've paid taxes, boom, you get to vote. And then also your adult sons get to as well, even if they're not currently paying taxes. The founders really preferred landowners. Yeah, they did. They had vestiges of Republican theories of political participation and liberty, where stakeholdership, ownership, and any sort of stake in the community was sort of necessary for responsibility. So they did. Now that has different connotations when you remember that at the time that these laws were passed, that was a pretty radical form of the franchise, actually, in the American colonies. The number of adult men who had some sort of ownership stake in land was much higher here than basically anywhere else in the world, or anywhere else in the world. I don't want to make the stronger historical claim and then be proved wrong, but almost anywhere else in the world. And so this is something that it might be something that Edmund Morgan points out in his Slavery and Freedom, the American Paradox essay. I think it's Morgan, but it's either Morgan or Storing in one of their essays on this subject points out, right, we like to focus on the land ownership part of this and be like, whoa, isn't that so crazy that you had to own land and be a man to do this? But really, actually, in historical context, this is a radical expansion of the franchise. And I think that's something that people would do well to note in these arguments about, stupid arguments, ultimately, like really, really dumb arguments about like the 19th Amendment and everything, and expanding the vote to women in the late 1800s and early 1900s across the globe. The idea that what already existed in America was a radical expansion of the franchise. So expanding it to women was not all that crazy, actually. That's another thing entirely. But okay. Oh my gosh, I gotta. Somebody make a better scan of this that I can download. Holy moly! Anyway, the really important thing here is this unicameral legislature and the executive power governorship by council. That's a pretty crazy thing. Okay, so let's go down to 359 and look at what Rush has to say about this present government of Pennsylvania. Let's see what Rush's evaluation of it is. Yeah, I'm becoming more convinced, though, that this is not something that I... oh, yes, okay, great. I will probably assign this essay. This is something that I'm going to bold this on my document, because this is something that will almost certainly make it into my summer reader, because this framework right here, I have never found in my life a better explanation of the idea of constitutionalism than this beginning of this first letter from Benjamin Rush on his observations upon the present government of Pennsylvania. So let me read it to you real quick. He says, every free government should consist of 3 parts. These 1, a Bill of Rights, 2, a Constitution, and 3, laws. Now, you might think, what are those things? You know what? I don't care if they know about it. All right. Honestly, like, I will not. No, I'm stopping. I'm using this channel for productivity, not provocation. Origin, okay? Productivity, not provocation. That should be my banner on this channel. My banner on this channel is productivity, not provocation. Now, I don't care about either of them. I just finished Rachel Wilson's book recently. It was very bad. Very, very bad. If I was grading it as an academic paper in a class, I'd give it, I'd be hard pressed not to fail it. Like in my charity, I might give it a D or a low C, but it would be very hard not to fail it because of its just dramatic failures of evidence of research and rigorous citation practice, misrepresentation of sources, factual inaccuracies. It's so bad. It's so bad. I mean, one of the more egregious ones. Let me just, I've mentioned this in my review of it on Goodreads, very short review, but in a section where she is talking about basically, didn't you know that women could do things before feminism? She mentions Hypatia. And she says Hypatia was a philosopher and an astronomer. She got to do philosophy and astronomy as a woman several centuries before Christ. I'm just going to let that sit for a second. And if you know anything about Hypatia, that should ring some alarm bells in your head. Because Hypatia is used as a feminist icon. She has a feminist philosophy journal named after her because, quite famously, Hypatia was killed by an angry mob of Christians, right? Followers of Christ. And so, if you just, do a simple mental whoop, 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 right? You say, okay, Hypatia killed by Christians. Hypatia lived centuries before Christ? No, right? So it's a simple error, right? And if all it was like she said Hypatia lived like 300 BC instead of AD or whatever, I think Hypatia died in 415 AD. If she had said Hypatia died in 415 BC, if she had just flipped the dates, that would have been fine. But the sentence construction itself said Hypatia lived several centuries before Christ. Like she didn't just say BC. She said several centuries before Christ. And so that to me tells me she doesn't know anything about her. She doesn't know anything about what feminists say about Hypatia. She doesn't know anything about the history. And that's just like egregious to me in a book about feminism. It blew my mind that to me is like, it's such a rudimentary error that it like throws the rest of it into like disarray. There were other things though that were much worse actually. So when you get to her information about the suffragette movements in New England, for example, all of her talking points are derived from propaganda pamphlets from men's anti-suffrage organizations, and she talks about how the suffragettes were sort of given like financial support, and it wasn't a grassroots movement, right? It was astroturfed. Is the phrase that I think she actually uses. Astroturfed as a phrase, and she neglects to point out that in the historical sources about this period, the anti-suffragettes had spending that far outstripped the suffragettes because they were so scared that the suffragettes would get traction. So it's an atrocious book. I have nothing positive to say about it at the end of it, except I do have something positive to say, which is it is actually an interesting thing that so many progressive social movements have such obvious ties to occultists, open occultists. Like that's an actually interesting thing. It's what makes the book so interesting I think it's what got her on Rogan, is like, Joe Rogan reads the premise and is like, wait, I didn't know about this, reads a little bit of it and is like, wait, all these feminists in history were doing seances and running around with these. That's an interesting thing. It actually is. I think it is. And so I see why she wrote it. It's just the execution was quite bad. This is nothing to do with what I was planning to talk about tonight, so apologies. Okay. Anyway, Origin, thank you for distracting me. This letter titled Defects, this is the editorial title. from this reader, which I don't actually like some of these editorial titles because I think it gives away the game too soon. She paints it as if the majority of feminists were occultists. Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument if you had some sort of, if you were willing to present the actual numbers and be like, oh man, how's it going, man? It's good to see you. Jack Canadar. Dude, I sent you a message on Discord back. Yeah, I'll follow up with you about the Purgatorio stuff. I'd be really excited to do it. The problem that I'll tell you now publicly is that, like, the only real free time I have right now is these times right now. Like, when my wife is working, my kids are in bed, and I have like an hour or two before I completely crash to go through some stuff. So I'm working on right now building a syllabus for a summer course that I'm working on, the political thought of the American founding. So these are the times when I am free. The mornings and afternoons and everything else are much harder. But man, Purgatorio I think is my favorite of the Divine Comedy, and I still feel bad for leaving you guys in the lurch so much on Inferno when it would have been really fun conversation. So if I can make it, I'd love to. But yeah, keep me posted. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by, man. Good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Miss you guys. It was a fun when I could show up. Yeah, so I do think I'll assign this, though, in this class, because I think this letter gives a... Did I not? Wait, hold on. Wait, what the heck? You're joking. You're joking. Hold on. You are dead right. I am not... Hold on, I'm going to send it right now so you know. Boom. Boom, there it is. Nope. You're dead right. I had it typed out and I thought, I'm so sorry. you nailed it. You nailed it. I had it typed out and I didn't hit enter. Holy cow. Oh my gosh. I'm so bad at messaging people. There you go. There it is. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I legitimately typed that out earlier and was like, oh, it's good to see you. Maybe you came because I messaged you. Nope. I just suck. I just suck at messaging. All right, hold on. I'll get my train of thought back eventually. Anyway, this section, very good explanation of constitutionalism. These definitions I end up drawing up on the board because I find students don't actually read this letter, which is fine. Because that's my expectation as a teacher a lot, is that students don't actually read what I assigned. But that gives me the opportunity in class to walk them through the reading, which is really fun. And so here's what Rush says he means by a Bill of Rights, a Constitution, and laws, okay? The Bill of Rights should contain the great principles of natural and civil liberty. It should be unalterable by any human power. And this I'm going to send to our good friend of the stream, Ryan Mullally, because this is an argument that he's had with people that I think is worth having, which is if all you are is a sort of institutionalist, or all you are is a sort of proceduralist about the American Constitution, then anything in it is changeable and it's all flat. It's all equivalent, right? We could have a constitutional amendment to make it a human right to access the internet, and we could have a constitutional amendment to get rid of the First Amendment. And either of those would be equivalent. And Ryan's point consistently has been no. One of these would be made, well, I don't know what he would say about the internet one, but at least, revoking the First Amendment, for example, would be a violation of natural law principle, right? To like, the reason we have the First Amendment is because there's something in the natural law that says we ought to protect these types of liberties, and a good government will do that. Rush gives an argument, or at least supports that intuition, where he says a proper government will have a Bill of Rights that is inalterable by any human power. A Bill of Rights, properly speaking for Rush, is the statement of things that if you don't do these things, you are not a good government anymore. Or if you're doing the Lockean analysis, it's if you are failing to protect these rights, then that government can be altered or abolished, right? That's the language we get in the Declaration straight from Locke. So the Bill of Rights, properly speaking, not necessarily our Bill of Rights, right? We could contest whether the Bill of Rights we have in America is what Rush is talking about, but the Bill of Rights as a concept, according to Rush, is something that ought to be inalterable by any human government. The Constitution, he says, is the executive part of the Bill of Rights. It should contain the division and distribution of the power of the people, the modes and forms of making laws, of executing justice, and of transacting business. Also, the limitation of power, As to time and jurisdiction, it should be unalterable by the legislature and should be changed only by a representation of the people chosen for that purpose. Dude, I am old and pining over that wardrobe. I am, dude. I think it's beautiful. I love it. I haven't seen it in person. You might be right about the refinishing it needs. It might be in worse shape than I imagine. Actually, some of the pictures on the inside especially suggest it's in worse shape than I imagine. But I do love the style. That's the kind of furniture I would fill my house with if I was primarily in charge of interior decorating. But my wife handles most of that, so I'm not actually mad about it. It was a joke. I fell in love with this wardrobe on Facebook Marketplace, and my wife was like, nope, not my favorite. And I was like sad about it, so I decided to make jokes about it on Twitter. And I got some of the weirdest haters off that tweet. It was so funny. Oh my goodness. The lady who the other day was saying that frickin' Eric Carl's Very Hungry Caterpillar or whatever is degenerate art was retweeted me. And man, oh my gosh. I don't know why I still use Twitter. I gotta get off. Okay, so Bill of Rights. The thing that sets out what government is for. It's inalterable. It's a principle thing. The Constitution itself arranges the powers of government, and then the laws execute that. Right? That's the structure of government, according to Rush. And then he goes on, and we're coming up on an hour, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but he goes on and says, basically, the Constitution of Pennsylvania fails on all of these points. One, it lacks a Bill of Rights. And what that means is that the supreme legislative power of Pennsylvania can pass whatever the heck laws they want, and nobody has a document they can point to and say, hey, that violated my right. Dude, it's half of them don't follow me, man. They don't follow me. They just respond to me. And I do have some weird followers, though. I think there's some crazy people who think I'm more on their side than I am, I guess. Oh, good heavens, man. Like, yeah, Twitter's it's a cesspool, but I love it. Like, every time I think about leaving it, I tweet something about this, for example, right? So I was tweeting about, oh, hey, I'm teaching this class this summer, and now I'm writing an essay on the Declaration for an online magazine, and all. So like, every time I think, oh, I should get off Twitter, it's like I get a new opportunity, I get a new podcast, I get a new, like, something, and I probably should just get off Twitter still, but like, it's so fun. It's too fun to give up, you know? But well, here we are. Yeah, so first and foremost, the Pennsylvania Constitution lacks a Bill of Rights. He says the Constitution is wholly repugnant to the principles of action in man and has a direct tendency to check the progress of genius and virtue in human nature. It supposes perfect equality and an equal distribution of property, wisdom, and virtue among the inhabitants of the state. In other words, Rush is faulting the Pennsylvania Constitution for being too egalitarian. So, again, you can find examples in the founding. Right, remember, we just read Paine, or small snippets of Paine. You can find people like Paine. I wouldn't put Franklin in the same category. Jefferson. You can find people in the founding who are more strongly egalitarian when it comes to political participation. Their ideal is more people involved in politics having a say. Rush is faulting the Pennsylvania Constitution for leaning toward that principle, and that's really important for him. Yeah, I mean, look, people get really mad at me about this too. Oh man, one of the weirdest controversies that I caused on Twitter not too long ago was when I made a tweet about my leftist friends. I had a bunch of people who followed me, who I think thought I was different than I am, I don't know, who were very offended by the fact that I would refer to them as my lefty friends or my leftist friends. They're like, you can't be friends with them. I'm like, well, one, I don't subscribe to your dumb friend-enemy distinction thing. And two, like, I'm not, I don't know, I just, online politics is worthless at the end of the day. That's where we are. Oh, good heavens. Okay, I've lost my plot completely. Anyway, I think I may wrap up here in just a minute. Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to assign Paine. I don't think I'm going to assign the Pennsylvania Constitution. I think I am going to assign Rush and explain the Pennsylvania Constitution to them. I will almost certainly, though, be assigning these Adams selections because they're so important for the counterpoint. Man, maybe it's so hard. It's kind of a distraction. Payne, Jefferson, Ellery, Floyd, Hall, and Franklin, all been. Yeah, I mean, in some respects, yeah. At least in some respects, yes. Yeah, well, okay, let me give you the biggest difference between Franklin and Paine, and you can find this. There's a letter from Franklin to Paine that Christians like to quote a lot. They abuse it badly, but separate from that, the big difference between Franklin and Paine was both tactical and in principle, I think. So Paine very openly and honestly was when somebody says I'm a deist, what we typically think they mean is somebody who believes there was some creative force, it's necessary to explain the universe, but doesn't currently intervene in any conceivable way, right? Not just doesn't reveal themselves in scripture, but isn't intervening in providential ways. Franklin and Paine seem to have a real fight about both whether or not you should tell people that you don't believe that there is such a thing as providence and whether or not providence exists. Franklin early on was very skeptical about this, but late in life, whether it was more a pragmatic thing for the Continental Congress or whether it's a sort of sincere belief change, I guess you could debate. But it does seem like, even in his letters to Paine, that Franklin does come to believe there is such a thing as providence, kind of providential force governing the universe and maybe, judging people and things like this. Maybe, he's obviously not believing in like a Christian system of judgment, but yeah, that seems to be a fight that they had. So I would at least divide them on that. But in terms of political principles, I think you're right. Like Paine and Franklin, for example, are both going to agree on this for sure, on unicameral legislature, expansion of the franchise, 100%. They're far more egalitarian than any other, not any other, but than most founders kicking around at the time. And God, yeah. Maybe he comes along and just shakes it up sometime, Okay, I made it an hour. That was my goal. I wanted to do an hour of this because if I didn't, I would feel really bad about myself for not doing anything this week. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to kill it for tonight. Next time, I want to go through all this Adams. Like, we are going to... Next time I stream, I don't know when it is. Actually, let me check my... Hold on. Might be tomorrow night, actually. Tomorrow night, probably. We are going to barrel through so much Adams. That's what I'm going to do. I get my kids in bed, and then 2 hours at least of Adams. So tell your friends, like the stream, share the stream. Tomorrow, I will tell you all of the virtues of the best founding father, John Adams. Not the best, actually. James Wilson was my favorite, but one of the best founding fathers, one of the worst presidents in American history, John Adams. We will read a lot of Adams together. We will read his Constitution of Massachusetts, compare it to the Pennsylvania one. We will read some selections from his thoughts on government. We will talk about what a constitution is from his perspective, and then we will read selections from his defense of the American constitutions and tell you exactly why we ought to have a bicameral legislature, why the Senate is fine and good, actually, why we should go back to indirect election of our senators, and all of these other wonderful things. I think that's what we'll do tomorrow. But for now, I am going to head off. Thank you guys for stopping by. Jacanadar, good to see you. I will message you back after the stream. I'm so sorry I forgot to hit enter, but I promise you I had actually written that message before stream, and I was very confused why it hadn't sent. Origin, thanks for stopping by. Josiah, what a guy. Oh, dude, it'll be great. So yeah, tomorrow night, show up and we can have a good argument. It'll be fun. Thank you guys. This has been fun. It made me do some stuff. So y'all have a good night, and I will see you probably